Morley took Sam to the dentist for a checkup at the end of the first week of school. A busy Thursday afternoon, they blew into the dentist's office 5 minutes late. Morley had been running late all day. She looked quizzically at Vicky, the receptionist, and pointed towards the doctor's office, lifting her eyebrows as she pointed. Vicky, who was, as usual, on the telephone, shook her head, tucked the receiver under her shoulder, and held up 10 and then 5 more fingers. Then she shrugged. What do you expect? Morley nodded and headed for the pile of magazines on the table by the door. She flipped past 2 issues of Dental Surgery, a chatelaine, and a dog-eared copy of People. She stopped with a smile of perverted pleasure when she came to the August edition of Healthy Guns. She didn't realize her mistake until she was halfway across the room. Gums, not guns. And she returned sheepishly to the pile and traded the Healthy Gums for the People, and then dropped into her regular chair beside the chest of children's toys. She always sat in this chair so she'd be close to Sam. She flipped open the magazine and settled into a profile of an author who had interviewed people about the dreams that they had had about members of the royal family. Morley was halfway through a dream involving the Queen Mother and a pack of feral corgis. The dream belonged to a British soccer player. It happened in a Spanish sort of town, explained the soccer player. Sort of like the running of the bulls. Except instead of bulls, there were these giant feral corgis. And the only one running was the Queen Mum. She was running like hell. And all these Spaniards lining the street were cheering her on. I think they were cheering her. I guess they could have been cheering the dogs. Morley was considering the implications of this dream when she looked up and realized Sam was not beside her, or by the aquarium either. Sam had settled into a chair on the other side of the waiting room. He was glumly swinging his legs back and forth as he rummaged through the magazines. He looked bored and peeved. He finally chose one magazine and dropped the rest back onto the table. Morley squinted at the cover across the waiting room. Epicure. Could be worse, she thought. Could have chosen Healthy Gums. The following Monday, the Monday after the dentist, Morley stayed home. The theater where she works is closed on Mondays. Monday's wash day. Everybody happy? Well, I should say. Morley has a cleaning lady these days, a woman from El Salvador who comes on Mondays. On Monday, Morley does laundry and changes beds and pays bills. And Monday afternoon, she goes to yoga. On the Monday morning after the first week of school, Morley was in Sam's bedroom changing Sam's bed. And when she put her hand down between the mattress and the bed frame to tuck in his blanket, she brushed against something that she wasn't expecting. Something that should not have been down there. Something smooth and slippery. Something that felt like a thick, glossy magazine. Morley pulled her hand out of there so fast she scraped her knuckles. She stepped back from the bed in horror and she closed her eyes. She looked up toward the ceiling. Oh, Lord, she sighed. Haven't I already done enough? Did you have to send this to me? Couldn't you have sent it to Ben's mom? And then she sighed and she opened her eyes and ran her hand through her hair. I don't know where I stand on this, Lord. Maybe it was time for Dave to have the man-to-man talk with his son. Or maybe, please, Lord, maybe this was one of those things that parents were supposed to ignore. Maybe if she ignored this shiny thing, it would go away. But she wasn't going to ignore it. She knew that. She couldn't ignore it. And before she knew it, she was back beside the bed and she was reaching down into that dark, tight, secret place between the bed frame and the mattress, and she was pulling the magazine out. It was a magazine. She held it up and she looked at the cover in trepidation. It was the July edition of Epicure. It was the gourmet magazine Sam had been reading at the dentist. Because she didn't mention this to anyone, not to Sam and not to Dave, because she decided to let nature take its own course, because she put the magazine back where she found it and didn't mention it to anyone, Dave found himself flying solo 2 days later, Wednesday, when Sam unexpectedly arrived at the Vinyl Cafe after school. This is not something Sam ever does, hardly ever. He hardly ever shows up at his dad's record store, especially after school. So Dave suspected something was up, but Sam didn't say what it was. He walked self-consciously up and down the aisles. He looked half-heartedly at some records. He stared at the customers for a while. And then after 20 minutes, he said, "I'll see you later." And he left as abruptly as he had arrived. The purpose of the visit didn't become clear until after dinner, when Sam came downstairs and found Dave lying on the couch reading. "I need to talk to you," he said. And then he looked around and added, "Alone." Dave struggled up onto an elbow, looked around the room and nodded. Sam said, "I'm a little embarrassed about this." Dave rested his book in his lap, Unknown Legends of Rock and Roll. He was reading about Syd Barrett, one of rock's most fascinating cult figures. "Okay," said Dave, moving his finger, which had been marking his place on the page of the book, and turning his book over on the arm of his chair, giving his son his full attention. "I think we're alone." "I saw a magazine," said Sam. He was fidgeting. He wouldn't look his father in the eye. I noticed a few things I'm interested in." "Uh-huh." That's what Dave said. It seemed like the safest reply. "What is a musky aroma of motherly bosom?" blurted Sam. "Uh-oh," said Dave under his breath. Syd Barrett driven completely from his mind. "What?" asked Sam. "Just which magazines have you been reading?" asked Dave. It's a magazine about, well, that's one of the things I'm embarrassed about," said Sam. "Now, Lord," said Dave, "take me now." "It's about eating," said Sam. It's a food magazine." "Huh?" said Dave. "And I read this article about truffles, and it said that a truffle tastes like, it says it's one of the most wonderful tastes in the world." "Thank you, Lord," said Dave. "And I don't know what a truffle is," said Sam. "Yes," said Dave. "What's a truffle?" said Sam. "Well," said Dave, "I'm not sure I understand everything there's to know about truffles. When I was a boy, it's not the sort of thing a boy would talk about with his dad." Sam was frowning. "Not that there's anything wrong with truffles," added Dave quickly. "A truffle is a beautiful thing. A truffle is a very special thing. You usually share truffles with someone who's very special to you." When I met your mom, for instance. Not right away. But after I'd known her for a while, I got her a truffle. Actually, to tell the truth, I gave her a box of them. Truffles. And I'd never done that with any other girl before in my life, which shows you how special your mom was. And I knew that, and so did she. But what are they?" said Sam. I'm getting to that," said Dave. A truffle is like a chocolate." "But what is it?" said Sam. "I'm telling you what it is," said Dave. It's a little chocolate, like the kind we get at Christmas, except they're very expensive and very delicious." "What does that have to do with the fragrance of a mother's bosom?" asked Sam. "I'm not sure," said Dave. "Because I was thinking," said Sam, "after I read about them, I saw a sign at Harmon's that says they're coming." "They're coming?" said Dave. "Truffles," said Sam, "from France. They're putting them on a plane on Friday. They'll be here on Saturday, and I wanted to get one. It says they're the most delicious taste in the world." "Well, there's nothing wrong with that," said Dave. "Good," said Sam, "because I already did it. You have to order in advance. I just wasn't sure if it was like if I was allowed. I thought maybe you had to be older or something." "Well, usually you do," said Dave, "but I don't see a problem." "How are you going to pay for your truffle?" "With my allowance," said Sam. "Good," said Dave. "Good," said Sam. And then Sam smiled and he stood up. He was halfway out of the room when he stopped and he turned. "I'm glad we had this talk, Dad. I feel a lot better. I feel sort of older." Me too, said Dave. Sam gets $5 a week allowance, and he has never spent a cent of it. He has a bank account, and every time he gets money, he puts the money in the bank. He puts his allowance in the bank and his Christmas money and the money his grandmother sends him on his birthday. It all goes in the bank. So when Dave told Morley that Sam had gone to the bank and withdrawn $25 to pay for truffles from Harmon's, they were both delighted. Delighted that he was finally spending some of his money. That was the point, wasn't it? You learned to save, and when you'd saved for a while, you bought something you wanted. Didn't matter what it was. It mattered that you learned the process of delayed pleasure. Truffles were a little odd, perhaps. But it didn't matter. It was the process. Both Dave and Morley had felt uncomfortable that Sam had all this money. He had over $300 in the bank, so they were delighted. And as they lay in bed that night, Dave said, I wonder how many truffles you get for $25 these days. Thursday at supper, Sam said, 2 more days. Friday at breakfast, he said, my truffles come tomorrow. Saturday morning, he was up and out the door at 9, I'm going to get my truffles. Harmon's is one of those specialty food stores that you visit on special Saturday mornings and buy maybe a baguette or some sharp cheddar cheese or maybe a small container of black olive paste. Harmon's is compact, elegant, friendly, and ridiculously expensive. And each time you go, you wish you had enough money so you could do all your shopping there. Everything at Harmon's looks better than the stuff you have in your house. The carrots at Harmon's look like they were manufactured in a sterile hydroponic factory in Sweden and have never come in contact with, well, earth for one. Human hands for another. The potatoes are round and clean and polite, and they have things on the shelves at Harmon's that you've never seen before in your life. Tiny red berries that look like they'd be extra sour and really good for your digestion. Miniature squash and zucchinis that look like they were grown especially for dollhouses. Giant cherries the size of tangerines. Green beans the length of your arms, and coffee that smells so good it would be a shame to drink it. And, of course, truffles. The sign by the cash register said, Truffles from France. One of the most ecstatic, enchanting, and edible experiences you'll ever have in your life. Order now for Saturday delivery. And there's Sam, coming through the door in his sneakers and jeans and T-shirt. He's locked his bike to the no parking sign out front. Sam, standing in front of the deli counter where Mr. Harmon is fiddling with a ceramic bowl of grilled mixed peppers. Mr. Harmon in his white shirt with the sleeves rolled up and his green apron. Yellow and green and red peppers grilled gently and mixed with garlic and onions and olives and salt and pepper floating in the ceramic bowl in the finest virgin Italian olive oil. Sam standing quietly in front of the counter, waiting to be noticed. When Mr. Harmon sees him, he smiles. And Sam says, Did they come? And Mr. Harmon nods. They came this morning, direct from Morley, a box of jewels. Jewels, said Sam. His mouth was beginning to water. Better than jewels, said Mr. Harmon, leaning forward over the counter and lowering his voice. Magical powers have been attributed to these things. And then he says, come, you can see for yourself. And he points at the large walk-in cooler at the back of the store. Sam licked his lips. And he followed Mr. Harmon through the store, past the mysterious fruits and the fresh sticks of bread and the jars of jam and the bottles of caviar. He followed Mr. Harmon to the back of the store to the big cooler. And he waited while Mr. Harmon pulled the big silver door open and stepped back like a hotel doorman. And he motioned him in. It was like walking into one of the great pyramids of Egypt. As Sam walked past Mr. Harmon and through the door of the freezer, he thought to himself, I will never forget this moment as long as I live. He had a momentary twinge of anxiety when Mr. Harmon stepped into the cooler and pulled the door closed behind him. It took a moment for Sam's eyes to adjust to the cool, dim light. He shivered and he wondered what would happen if they couldn't get the door open again. Then he heard Mr. Harmon calling to him. They're over here, said Mr. Harmon. As Sam stepped around a huge crock of olives and ducked under a large ham hanging from the ceiling, he forgot all about the closed door. He was walking in a refrigerator. It was like he had been made miniature, like he was walking around the fridge at home. He felt lightheaded as he watched Mr. Harmon remove a wooden box from the shelf in the far corner. The box was the size of the television set in his parents' bedroom. It was covered with a piece of cloth. It was full of rice. Mr. Harmon picked up a wooden spoon off the shelf and he began to dig in the rice. After a moment, he lifted the spoon out of the box and held out a dirty, roundish, brown lump. He was beaming. "The black diamond of Provence," he said. He bent over and he smelled the dirty lump, and then he pushed the spoon towards Sam and he nodded. Sam looked puzzled. "Go ahead," said Mr. Harmon. "Smell. It's like a distant field of pineapples." Sam leaned forward and breathed in, and he wrinkled his nose. He wasn't sure what to say. He looked up at Mr. Harmon. Mr. Harmon was still smiling at him. "What is it?" said Sam. "It's your truffle," said Mr. Harmon, taking a step back. But it looks like a fungus," said Sam. "It is a fungus," said Mr. Harmon. But I thought it was made out of chocolate," said Sam. "Chocolate?" said Mr. Harmon. "Where have you been getting your information? The schoolyard? The street corner?" "My dad," said Sam. Another man, a more sensitive man, a man less obsessed with food, might have offered to refund Sam his money. The idea never occurred to Mr. Harmon, not because of avarice. He could have easily sold the truffle 2 or 3 times over, and not out of a meanness of spirit either. Quite the contrary, Mr. Harmon believed that in Sam he had met his kindred spirit. He believed he was doing the boy a favor. Mr. Harmon was completely out of touch with what children like to eat. In his heart of hearts, Mr. Harmon believed that Sam would love the truffle, needed the truffle. "Pasta," he whispered, as they stepped out of the freezer. "Slice it as thin as you can. Slice it as thin as paper. Arrange the slices on a dish of pasta and the flavor." His hands flew up to his mouth as he searched for the words. It's something that can't be explained. It has to be experienced. "Ambrosia," he said. Sam followed Mr. Harmon to the cash register. He reached into his pocket and carefully counted out the money he had withdrawn from the bank, $28.75. He handed it to Mr. Harmon. "This is too much," said Mr. Harmon. It's only $25. The tax," said Sam, who had worked everything out to the penny. "No tax," said Mr. Harmon, handing the $3.75 back to Sam. "No tax on truffles." Sam stood on the sidewalk beside his bike, clutching the brown paper bag Mr. Harmon had handed to him. He was confused. This was not anything like he had imagined. He had imagined he was going to pedal home with a large box of chocolate, $25 worth of chocolate. He'd imagined it would be better than Halloween. He'd imagined there'd be so much chocolate he might have a hard time carrying it on his bike, which is why he'd brought his backpack. He stood on the sidewalk, unsure of what he should do next. He had imagined taking the chocolate home and setting it out on the kitchen table, letting everyone, each person in his family, his mother and his father, even his sister, 1 chocolate each. He felt alone and small and miserable. He didn't want to cry on the sidewalk in front of Harmon's. He took off his backpack and he dropped the paper bag inside, and he got on his bike and he pedaled off down the sidewalk, weaving around a man with a dog and past a woman pushing a stroller. Most of all, he didn't want to look stupid, especially in front of his parents. 3 blocks later, instead of turning right on the street that would have taken him home, Sam stood up on his pedals and he wheeled left. 5 minutes later, he was at the IGA standing in front of the pasta display, frowning at the dizzying packages of different shaped noodles. He had 47 cents left when he left the store. Before he went home, he went to the bank and returned it to his account. And he cooked supper that night for the first time in his life. I don't need any help, he said. I'll call you when it's ready. He set the table by himself. Everyone got a paper towel as a napkin and a serving of Coca-Cola poured from a glass bottle. It tastes better out of glass bottles, said Sam proudly. Dinner's ready, said Sam. And they all came into the kitchen. And when they were sitting at their places, Sam carried one covered dish carefully across the kitchen to the table, his bottom lip sucked tightly into his mouth. And he set the dish in front of his mother, and Morley shook her head. The chef serves, she said. So he moved it and put it down in front of his place, and then Dave said, "What have you cooked us?" And Sam took the cover off the dish, and Stephanie said, "Kraft dinner." And Sam said, "Kraft dinner with truffles." And Morley sucked in her breath, and she looked at Dave, her hand over her mouth, and then she looked quickly over at Stephanie, who remarkably hadn't said another thing. And now it was Morley who wanted to cry, thinking as she watched her son earnestly spooning the sticky orange noodles onto the plate his sister was holding patiently in the air in front of him, of how they had grown and how they were becoming, no mistake about it, remarkable people. These are the truffles, Sam was saying. They bring out the flavor of the cheese, but you have to try it. It's hard to describe. Thank you very much.